At MD Coaches, the company behind this podcast, one of the most frequent challenges we encounter among physicians is the disconnect between the professional lives they envisioned and the realities that they face every day. It's a challenge many of us experience, often coupled with the gap between how we want to live our personal lives and what our days actually look like. Well, my guest today, Dr. Kristine Goins, knows these disconnects all too well. But what sets her apart is how she faced them head-on and transformed her life in a way that many might find unconventional and yet deeply inspiring. Dr. Goins' journey from recognizing the symptoms of burnout to radically redesigning her life is a story that will resonate with many of you. But what she did next might challenge your ideas about what's actually possible. There are times in our lives that change the way we see the world. Navigating these challenges can take insight, trusted confidants, or even a coach. Let's explore those moments. In this companion podcast to RX for Success, we will discover ways to learn and write our own success stories together. I'm Dr. Dale Waxman, a physician coach with MD Coaches, and this is Life-Changing Moments. As a board-certified integrative adult and pediatric psychiatrist, physician coach, and world traveler, Dr. Goins' professional path is impressive. She graduated from Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, completed her adult psychiatry residency at Emory University, and a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship at Yale. Her passion for healing beyond conventional led her to complete an integrative medicine fellowship at the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. For those interested in hearing more about Dr. Goins' early journey into medicine, be sure to check out her detailed story on our sister podcast, RX for Success, episode number 191. But today, we're going to explore what it took for her to recognize the signs of burnout, make bold life changes, and embrace a lifestyle of freedom and fulfillment. Her story is not just about surviving. It's about thriving in ways that might just redefine what's possible for you too. So, Dr. Kristine Goins, welcome to Life-Changing Moments and welcome back to the MD Coaches family of podcasts.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be back.
Well, it's great to have you back. And for those who did not listen to the episode on the RX for Success with Dr. Randy Cook, that's the RX for Success episode 191, where we hear Dr. Kristine Goins' path into medicine story and also her path into what she's now doing, which we're going to hear just a little bit more about. Today's show is to kind of dive a little deeper in some of her decision-making about a situation where she was in her life, but also something about how she got to what she's doing now. So, just to get us started, where are you right now geographically?
Right now, I'm in Boca del Toro, Panama.
Oh, that's awesome. So as those of you who will tune into RX for Success will know that you go to a different location periodically. Is it about every month or so?
Yeah, about every 3 months is typically the average. But I've been here about four months now.
Okay, very good. Awesome. And how is it there?
I mean, I've been here many times before. It's kind of like my home away from home. It's really beautiful. It's hot. There's dolphins. I live on the sea and in the jungle. So it's like paradise.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. There's a great Wi-Fi connection, so we're able to talk here. Some that have not listened to that first RX for Success episode will be wondering, so it hasn't always been this way. You are a working psychiatrist. You're in Panama. You are doing, and you move around about every 3 months. And your clients are, I assume, mostly back in the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, they are.
So you're doing predominantly virtual kind of medicine. So it wasn't always that way. And as people who have listened to the show know, it's a lot about inflection points in our lives. And What I'd like to do, Kristine, is take you back to an earlier point in your professional career. So, as I recall, you had completed psychiatry residency, or you are boarded in both adolescent and adult psychiatry, as well as having completed an integrative medicine fellowship. And you were well into an academic career, plus you had a PLLC for some consulting work. And then you mentioned that you experienced burnout. And what I'd like to do before we get into talking more with you is to play a clip from that interview with Randy about that particular time.
Work in areas that were really, really important to me. But what I had experienced throughout my medical journey was also a lot of burnout. You know, even though I was doing work that I loved, it always seemed that I was doing work that I loved in medicine to the exclusion of everything else that I really loved, because I loved travel. And now I'm not talking about go away for the weekend, you know, take 5 days off. I'm talking about immersing myself in different cultures and communities and staying and learning the language and things like that. So, you know, I felt that I was only living a part of my dream life and not the whole thing. And so for me, that would culminate in different periods and seasons of burnout, which I experienced throughout. And when I became an attending, I thought things would be different. We always think things are going to be different in the next stage and the next stage and the next. So when I got to this place of intensity where my time was so out of alignment with what I valued in terms of where I wanted my life to go, it turned into physical manifestation. So it turned into chest pains, full body spasms, and I ended up in a neurologist's office just in distress.
Bringing that back to you. First of all, what's it like to just sort of hear that back and take you back to that time?
It's interesting that that all led to where I am right now. Sometimes just looking back, like, wow, that all actually happened.
Yeah. So we'll talk in a little bit about from that moment to the moment you're in now, but I wonder if we can spend a little bit of time in what that was like at that time, because a lot of listeners may be in a similar kind of situation and can identify with what you're experiencing. So do you have some thoughts right now about how do you understand how you got to that place of burnout?
What I remember and gathered, there was a certain expectation of how life should be as a physician, and especially in certain environments, such as academia, which is where I was. And in that environment, particularly when you are just new, fresh out of training, coming along, there's an idea that these are the things that you like to do. These are the things you're going to do. And typically there are things that also require a lot of time, a lot of energy, might be things that other people don't necessarily want to do, even though you might enjoy them. And so I really had a lot on my plate from the very beginning. I was going to different schools in the area. I was going to 6 different schools throughout the month. I was going to 2 different clinics in the community, as well as like going to the hospital that I worked at. So I was really like all over the place and all over the city. And in addition to doing my PLLC, which I did once a week on the side, and all the additional unpaid hours that came with teaching and doing documentation and care coordination for patients and all of the things that, you know, many of us do as physicians that we don't necessarily get paid for, but are part of providing really excellent care. I found myself working probably an extra 20 plus hours a week that were unpaid. And so I think that's really what led to the burnout. It was a lot of time. It was a lot of labor. It was really feeling like I didn't have a lot of control over what I was doing and how I was going about it. And there was a lot of administrative pressure to see more patients and not take time off, even though it was very stressful, particularly in the beginning. And thankfully, I did have a chief that I could go to and who could kind of be in between administration and me. But not everyone has that. And even though I did have that, it still didn't necessarily make me feel any different because I would still have chest pain going from one school at one end of the city to a school at the next. And so it was very stressful and it still produced physical manifestations for me.
Are you a doctor struggling to provide the best care for your patients while dealing with financial and caregiving matters out of the scope of your practice? Do you find yourself scrambling to keep up with the latest resources and wish there was an easier way? Then this virtual caregiver conference resource will save you time, money, and sanity by giving you all the resources and information your patients need in one place. This conference helps you and your patients enlist the best strategies around healthcare resources and the best financial steps for your patients while navigating caregiving situations. You don't have to go home feeling frustrated and helpless because you couldn't connect your patients with the best services. Find out more at jeanniedoherty.com or click in the link in the show's notes. You don't want to miss this caregiver resource.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but first, I'd like to share a message from Navigate. You know, after spending years in the financial sector, Navigate has met lots of clients with all kinds of student loan issues. They were confused, they were overwhelmed by the doublespeak and the overly complex forms, and especially the deliberately misleading statements from loan servicer representatives. Navigate recognized the chaos in the student loan industry and immediately brought clarity and real solutions. If you'd like to flip the script on student debt, visit www.flipthescript.loan/MD-coaches to schedule a call with Navigate. They'll tailor a plan specifically for your unique situation and work with you until the loan is paid off. What do you have to lose besides the stress of student loan debt?
If I want to just sort of summarize what I'm hearing is that the position itself, this was the job description. It involved all those things. So it was the position itself and not necessarily you taking on more than the position, or did you take on more than with the position? Because I heard a little bit of, I'm a young faculty person, and there's sort of some implicit expectations. Did I read that right?
Yeah, I think it's a balance. I think there's an aspect that's part of the job and part of the system. I think that's part of the role and part of the issue. There's another aspect of, okay, you're young, you just got here, do you want this opportunity? And there were opportunities that I did say yes to because I really did want the opportunity. I was excited. I was like, oh, this will help me grow in this career. So there was saying yes to different opportunities. And then I think it's also the part that I play, which I think really becomes the most important part, which I don't think I realized at that time. I just thought this is what everyone does. This is what happens to everyone. But feeling like I didn't have any control of the matter, feeling that I had to say yes at some point when it came to like the seventh thing and I didn't actually want to do it and I wasn't excited to do it. At that point, I felt, I'm already in, this was like a year, or so later when I had been there for a little while, but, I'm already in this position of, leadership. So I have to say yes. It was all of those things that I was telling myself that kept adding more and more things to my plate instead of saying no, or instead of saying I've already, reached my bandwidth and or I need to really go in a different direction. I think all of those things really culminated in the burnout.
There's a little bit of a quality of this is what I've said yes to, and then I'm also getting asked to do more. And there's a little bit of, you said the word, I didn't have a lot of control, but maybe also not a lot of power, to be able to say no when you're really early in your career like that. Would you concur with that?
I think it's a perception that we have.
Okay.
I think it's a perception that we don't have control. And I think it's a perception that we don't have power. And it's an internal belief that we hold, and we hold them not just with ourselves, we hold them with other people who just started with us, and as a group, we believe in that. And it's not that it doesn't play out necessarily in dynamics with other people who have been there longer, but I don't think it's actually true that we don't have power or true that we don't have control. I think it's just a belief that we hold that maybe early on we haven't learned how to shift yet.
Yeah. I would agree with you, by the way. I hear you. One of the issues that I keep hearing from people is kind of that concept of I don't have agency, but they really do. They just don't realize it because we've maybe colluded with the system to say, I guess this is the way it's supposed to be. It's our own idea about the way it's supposed to be. Yeah. So let me kind of take us forward here. What were some of the early signs or feelings that you were heading towards burnout? What were some of the things that you experienced?
Feeling overwhelmed. And I felt that way 3 months in. I actually called up someone who helped recruit me there, who had already left, and said, am I crazy? Or is this too much? Am I incompetent? Do I just not know how to do this job well enough? I was confused. And I think at that point in your career, when you're first starting, you're more likely to think it's you that's the problem than everything, than the system or anything like that. And that person really helped to support me and let me know that, they had left for similar reasons, that it wasn't just me and that I wasn't incompetent, but that it was a lot to put on one person's plate. And so I think that helped me to understand that there wasn't something deficient. Though it didn't change my actual situation, I think I was able to then just kind of walk through it. And I think I told myself, well, maybe things will change if I bring up the fact that, this is really challenging or it's too much. And I did that. I spoke to leadership and some things changed. But like I mentioned earlier, as you move forward, there were, additions and more opportunities. And eventually all the things that had dropped or shifted, they had all added back up again. And there was a few more things like cherries on top of that. And so whereas initially it has started with just overwhelm, then it became chest pains. Later, it became abdominal issues, a lot of anxiety. And like you played in the clip, at some point, it started with like just my eyelids having like an abnormal twitch. And I thought, oh, well, I'm really tired. And that's probably what's causing it, because I would have some trouble sleeping at night because I'd be thinking about like, oh my gosh, I have all these notes to do. I got to make sure I'm in this part of the city tomorrow. And it went from my eyelids to my arms to my legs. Next thing you know, my whole body is having like abnormal twitching. And so that's when I got really, really concerned that I was having some type of neurological disorder that I couldn't get rid of. And I thought, oh, wow, I've done this to myself. I've allowed myself to get so stressed out that I've created this dis-ease in my physical body.
Yeah, wow. Scary time also, where there's that amount of physical manifestations of the stress. And so that brings us up to that part of the clip where you visited the neurologist. And so what I want to do is continue on for just a little bit, for about another minute in there, with what happened with that.
It turned into physical manifestations. So it turned into chest pains, full body spasms, and I ended up in a neurologist's office just in distress, talking about how my work was really, really stressful for me. And in about 5 minutes into it, the neurologist cut me off and said, look, I can prescribe you Lexapro. And I was kind of confused, a little taken back, because I thought I was trying to convey the impact that the work I was doing was having on me. And, he said to me point blank, he said, look, you're not going to leave your job, are you? So if you're not going to leave your job, then take the medicine so you could continue. And for me, particularly as a psychiatrist, I really, really was shocked. It made me think more about the life that I was living, because I really didn't feel any kind of chemical imbalance. I really felt that there was an imbalance in the way that I was living my life in terms of my values.
Kristine, that was a moment when you're in the middle of that neurologist's office.
It most definitely was.
Can you say some more about what you were thinking, what you were feeling, before we kind of get on to what were some of the next steps?
I think what came to mind, part of me kind of went to my physician self, and I was disheartened with how healthcare is being practiced by some folks, I think, in the US, and that was like the go-to in that moment of me really just wanting to be heard and to be listened to. And then I think from like my patient self, recognizing that I was in front of someone who maybe at the time felt like either they didn't have the time or they didn't have the capacity to sit there and listen, and maybe even wanted to do what they felt they could do, which was to give a medication. I think just my human self was like, I don't like these options. Either be miserable or take this pill just doesn't sound like the kind of options that I want. And I think that was really a mirroring of what I was experiencing outside of the office, that I had these, perceived options given to me by being in the medical field. Like either you go into academia or you go into private practice. If you don't, oh my goodness, all you care about is money, or, you should be doing this for the love of it. And that's it. And I had to start thinking, like, who is the person that is giving me these options and who's really in control? It's not the neurologist. It's not my chief. It's not the administrators or even the system. It's not that they're not at play, but I'm the one who has control over my options and what I choose to do next.
Which is quite remarkable to have that level of insight and also that sense of intentionality and growth. Can you talk a little bit about from the moment that you stepped out of that neurologist exam room to that moment of I'm the one in control here? What amount of time was there and what did you do to get to that?
I think it was pretty immediate, because I think the whole situation was so jarring for me that I was like, this is that's it. It was almost the cherry on top by that point, because I really had been thinking about this for about 9 months in terms of I had created a space for myself every week. I had started coaching for the first time in my life. I had had an hour a week that I was taking to just reflect on where I was in my career, what my responsibilities are, and where I wanted to go next. And I think if I hadn't created that space, I don't think I would have been able to have that insight after that moment so quickly. But I think because I had created that space for myself, that it just, everything culminated and it became very clear that I have to do something and I can't wait on things to change. And I can't rely on my previous self-limiting thoughts of all the reasons why it's not going to work. I can't rely on that. I have to move forward and think about how this can actually work and focus on that.
Awesome. And so how this can actually work, what was this that you'd been contemplating?
This was, how do I travel full time while still enjoying the passion of practicing medicine?
That's awesome. So that'd been brewing there. And, as we heard earlier in the clip is, I really enjoyed what I do, but I was missing out on all the other things that I really enjoy what I do. And travel obviously is very important to you. So how did you get it to happen? Tell us about that transition.
Yeah, I think it was starting with some writing. I have been journaling since 5th grade. So I probably wrote down about 50 different things that were things that I just didn't know. I was confused. Like, what do I do with my student loans? What are my colleagues going to think? What is my family going to think? What do I do about insurance? What about my, retirement accounts? Like, there were just all of these things that seemed like, now they seem small, but then they seem very big and very scary. And I decided that I would figure out each one and just go down the list.
So you were tackling all of those kind of one by one, having articulated, here are all these things that may be barriers. These are my hesitancies. And so instead of allowing those to remain as a barrier, you said, let's actually address each of these. Is it possible for me to do something about that? So tell us a little bit about that process. What amount of time was that take before you moved out of that position?
I would say the entire process of starting to check off those things probably took about 5 months. And at the end of that 5 months is when I got on a plane and left the US. So what was also happening after I created that list of things that I was going to slowly, check off one by one, is I started to think about how I could commit to the goal that I was trying to reach by the end of that 5 months. I didn't know it was going to take 5 months, but I picked a deadline and I bought a one-way ticket and I said, this date and this time, I'm leaving the US. So whatever needs to happen before this date, we need to get it together. And I think having made that commitment and buying that ticket really allowed there to be a deadline for me so that I couldn't keep prolonging or come up with, allow my fears to just keep me in a place of confusion or sit and ruminate about the different excuses that I had made up. So I did that. And I also booked a meeting with my chief to discuss me leaving, which was very scary also.
You've addressed some of the things that we see in coaching a lot, which is, identify what are the limiting beliefs, what are the barriers, how do we moving through how to overcome those barriers, and the other part, setting a goal. Here's where I'm going to be. That's all awesome. Thank you for articulating those. What other lessons did you learn about you during that process of that 5-month process?
A few different things. I think one of the things that I learned was that I didn't have to know everything. Like, there's still some things on that list of 50 items that I still haven't done. And I've been living abroad for, 3.5 years. So it also let me know that you don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to know everything, but there's some core essential things and you can figure those things out. I think that's the part two of it is like everything is figure outable if you just allow yourself to be in a space to believe that you could figure it out. I think is when we like hold ourselves and like, but I don't know, and it's hard and it's scary. But I think if we sit more in a space of, well, if it were possible, how? How could it work out? It allows things to be much more figure outable. And so I learned like, oh, I can figure out hard things. I can do hard things.
Yeah, I love what you said, that not everything is all cleared up, but enough of it was cleared up for you to move your life forward. I think listeners are going to be curious about what it is that you're doing. We've alluded to it a little bit, but can you talk about the practicalities of what your life is like now professionally and personally, if you choose to share that?
Yeah, so I work a couple days a week. I contract with psychiatric clinics in DC and Virginia, where I practice, where my medical licenses are. And I consult with patients virtually. It allows me just to have a great deal of flexibility. I really enjoy the work that I do. I've always loved psychiatry, and I've always loved psychiatry more when I do it less than 20 hours a week. And so I love that I get to do it as much as I want to do it and as much as, brings me joy. And in addition to doing that, I also work with doctors to help them have lives of freedom and balance by teaching them how to work less and live anywhere.
You mentioned that you kind of move around about every 3 months. How do you decide where you're going next?
Yeah, so one of the things that I love about time freedom is that ability I talked about to do the other things that you're really, really interested in. So since medical school, I had been really interested in wine and studying wine. I think of it like a passport in a glass. And I became a wine professional. So a lot of times I'm thinking about, okay, this is the wine region that I need to go to next so I can study, A, B, C, D. And so that guides a lot of my locations.
That's awesome. Well, great. So you've really gone through very nicely about the events that got you into a place of it's really time to move on, but also really thoughtful, growth mindset oriented way of approaching how to move yourself into a place that is a much more fulfilling life for yourself. Is there anything that I have not asked you about that you'd like to impart to listeners about your journey to where you are now?
I think one of the thought processes that I had, and I see it come up with clients as well, is like the fear of failure or what's going to happen if I don't reach my goal. And I started to think about that even at that, time that I was trying to create this. I realized that even if I went to the extent of like, okay, well, what else is going to happen? What else is going to happen? Usually I found myself like, I'll end up under a bridge somewhere in Colombia with no money and nobody knows I'm there. It's like worst case scenario. And then I'm like, okay, Kristine, what else would you do? I'm like, okay, well, I guess I would just go back to DC and start working again. And so I would end up back in the place that I was already in. And so I said, well, if the worst thing that's going to happen is I just come back and do what I'm already doing, then why not take the risk of living my life fully the way that I want? So I would say that's one of the things that I would do is just keep asking yourself, well, what else, and really get to the bottom of what's the worst possible thing that really will happen. And if you're going to be back doing what you're doing right now, I think it's worth it. And I think the second thing is I really had to learn to trust myself. Because when I made the decision, not everyone in my life was on board. Not, my mom wasn't. People have their own fears of you doing the things that you want to do in life, and they love you and they care for you. But even if no one else sees the vision, you have to be the one to see the vision and hold the vision for what you really want. And there were a few people who did support me, and I decided that what I wanted to do in my decision and having those few people support me, I made that enough. And so just decide what's going to be the enough for you, like to just be on board and have your own back and trust yourself that you're making the best decision for your life. And every single person who did not agree at the time is enjoying free vacations abroad at this time. And they're very happy with my decision.
That's great. It's a great outcome. There's a couple of things that come to mind as you're talking here. Somebody once said a long time ago that I heard them say, life is not a dress rehearsal. You only get one chance at this. So why not look for the ways, if you really are passionate about something, that this is what would give me a fulfilling life, trust that that's probably the right thing for you, and to seek that and then to enjoy it. And you are living that, and you're embodying that, and you're an inspiration. And so I know that listeners are really going to enjoy hearing a little bit deeper, deconstruction of your story. You are very human. You had all the same fears and challenges and things like that to actually overcome. And so really, thank you for illuminating us with your story. I wish you well as you move forward, and I hope that our paths cross again.
Thank you so much. I also appreciate you having me.
Thank you for tuning in to Life Changing Moments. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to rate us 5 stars and leave a review. Doing so helps our podcast reach more listeners. Have something to share? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Visit the MD Coaches community on Facebook groups. This dynamic virtual space is a place to continue discussion about life-changing moments and perhaps share some life-changing moments of your own. Join the conversation today.